It was supposed to be just another night at one of the city's most exclusive clubs, velvet ropes, flashing lights, and a crowd that measured worth by the price of a bottle. But when a quiet, well-dressed black man took a seat at a reserved VIP table, whispers turned into stares, and stares into confrontation. A couple, confident in their privilege, decided he didn't belong there. They had no idea who they were dealing with. Because the man they tried to humiliate wasn't just another guest, he owned the entire place. But they wouldn't learn that until it was too late. But first, please make sure to subscribe the channel and comment below from which city you are watching this video. Malcolm Reed wasn't the type of man who needed to prove himself. In his late 30s, calm-eyed and soft-spoken, he'd built his fortune quietly, the kind of wealth that didn't scream for attention. From the outside, he looked like any other successful businessman. But behind the measured smile was a story of hard work, rejection, and an unshakable belief that dignity couldn't be bought or taken away. Born and raised in a working-class neighborhood, Malcolm knew what it meant to be underestimated. Every meeting, every handshake, every deal. He'd learned to sense the unspoken doubt that followed him into rooms where people didn't expect a black man to lead. Yet he never let it show. He built tech companies, invested in others, and eventually bought the very club where those same people gathered to celebrate success. That night, he arrived alone, dressed in a tailored black suit, intending to unwind at a place he quietly owned. The music pulsed through the marble floor, laughter echoed off glass walls, and champagne flowed without pause. To most, he was just another guest enjoying the night. But as he sat at a private VIP table, one he'd personally designed into the club's layout, he noticed the glances. A couple across the room, dressed to impress, watching him with a mix of curiosity and contempt. To them, he didn't fit the picture. A black man sitting where power usually reclined. Malcolm didn't know it yet, but the night meant to celebrate his quiet victory would soon turn into something else, a test of patience, pride, and just how far ignorance could go before truth finally stood up. At first, it was just a look, the kind that lasts too long, filled with silent judgment. Malcolm felt it, but ignored it. He'd been here before in boardrooms and restaurants, in airports and conferences. Eyes that scanned him from shoes to watch, searching for cracks in legitimacy. He'd learned to breathe through it, to let composure be his armor. But the couple wasn't content to just stare. The man leaned toward the hostess, whispering with a smirk, while his partner rolled her eyes toward Malcolm. Moments later, a young waitress approached the table, her polite smile uneasy. "Sir," she began carefully, "this area is reserved for VIP members tonight." Malcolm's brow lifted slightly. He nodded calm and replied with quiet confidence, "I know." But before he could say more, the couple rose from across the room, walking over with an air of ownership. The man's tone was casual, but sharp enough to cut. "We actually reserved this table. I think there's been a mistake." A mistake. Malcolm looked at them. Two people used to being right, used to being obeyed. He could have ended it right there, revealed who he was, but he didn't. Years of dealing with assumptions had taught him that patience exposed truth better than confrontation ever could. He gestured toward the empty seat beside him. "You're welcome to ask management," he said simply. But the woman scoffed, her voice rising just enough to draw attention. "Unbelievable," she muttered. "Every time. Security never checks properly." Heads turned. A few patrons pretended not to notice, but curiosity filled the air like static. Malcolm felt the room shifting, not just in noise, but in energy. That quiet, invisible line between comfort and judgment was being crossed. Moments later, a security guard arrived, uncertain, glancing between the couple and Malcolm. The couple's expressions hardened with self-assurance, the kind built on years of never being questioned. "Sir," the guard began, "could I see your membership card?" Malcolm looked at him, not angry, just tired. "You can," he said softly, "but you might want to check with the manager first." Confusion flickered across the guard's face. The couple crossed their arms, whispering to each other, convinced they'd won. Around them, the music felt quieter, the air thicker. Every moment stretched longer than it should. The guard disappeared toward the back office, and the couple returned to their smug conversation nearby, throwing glances meant to remind him he didn't belong. Malcolm sat still, back straight, eyes steady. He wasn't angry, not yet. He'd faced bigger humiliations in his climb to success. But something about this moment hit differently. This wasn't about wealth or power. It was about perception. It was about how, no matter what he achieved, someone would still look at his skin and decide he didn't deserve his own space. Minutes passed. The crowd had started whispering. Even the DJ seemed to sense the tension, lowering the volume slightly. The couple exchanged satisfied smiles until the door to the office opened again. The manager walked out, eyes wide, whispering urgently to the security guard. They both looked toward Malcolm with something between shock and apology. The couple noticed it too, confusion dawning. The man leaned closer to his partner. "What's going on?" he muttered. But before they could piece it together, the manager started walking toward their table, his posture stiff, his face pale. Something was about to change. The quiet, controlled moment before the truth hit, that was the calm before the storm. The manager's approach changed everything. His eyes darted between the couple and Malcolm, panic flickering beneath his forced composure. The music pulsed faintly in the background, but the room had gone quiet, a strange, heavy silence that only happens when people sense something big is about to unfold. The couple stood tall, confident that the manager had come to correct the mistake. The man gestured dismissively toward Malcolm. Finally, he said, "Can we get this sorted? We've been waiting long enough." But the manager did look at them. He stopped in front of Malcolm, lowered his head slightly, and spoke just loud enough for the room to hear. "Mr. Reed, I'm terribly sorry for the misunderstanding." Gasps rippled through the crowd. The couple froze. The woman blinked rapidly, her confidence draining in real time. "Wait, what?" she whispered. The manager continued, his voice trembling. "This is Mr. Malcolm Reed, owner of Monarch Lounge." He turned toward the couple, his professional tone returning. "You're sitting at his private table." The color drained from their faces. For a long, breathless second, no one moved. The man's arrogance cracked, replaced by a cold, desperate silence. The woman's hand hovered near her mouth, as if trying to erase the words she'd said earlier. Around them, every pair of eyes in the room watched in stunned disbelief. Malcolm sat still, calm, but the weight of the moment pressed deep into his chest. Years of prejudice, quiet slights, and unspoken doubt, all of it condensed into this single, public reckoning. The man stammered, We didn't know." Malcolm finally stood, meeting their gaze with quiet strength. "That's the problem," he said softly. "You never ask. You just assume." For a heartbeat, the room stayed utterly still. No music, no chatter, only the echo of truth hanging in the air. The couple's pride shattered under the eyes of everyone who'd once shared their silence. And as Malcolm turned away, the irony lingered like a mirror. The very people who thought he didn't belong had just been guests in his house. The silence that followed was heavier than any argument could have been. The couple mumbled an apology that barely reached Malcolm's ears before slipping away, faces pale, eyes low. Around them, the guests avoided eye contact, not out of guilt for what they'd said, but for what they hadn't. They'd watched it unfold, each glance and whisper, and no one had spoken up. Malcolm didn't need their apologies. He'd lived too many versions of that same moment to count. The quiet disbelief when success wore the wrong skin, the stunned silence when prejudice met truth. That night wasn't the first time he'd been tested, and he knew it wouldn't be the last. But this time, it had happened in a place he'd built, under lights he'd paid for, on floors he'd chosen. When the music finally resumed, it wasn't celebration anymore. It was reflection. Malcolm walked out through the same doors he'd once entered as a customer years ago, the same doors that symbolized how far he'd come, and how far the world still had to go. He didn't need to say anything more. The message was already written across every uneasy face in that club. Wealth and status might change how people see you, but it doesn't erase what they've been taught to believe. Outside, the night air was cool against his skin. The city glowed, alive, indifferent, endless. He thought of the younger version of himself, the one who'd been told to know his place. And he realized he'd found it, not because of money or power, but because he never let their ignorance decide his worth. Moments like that remind us how deep the roots of bias still run, not just in strangers, but in systems, habits, and silence. And maybe that's the question we all need to ask ourselves. When we see injustice in front of us, do we speak up, or do we stay silent until the truth embarrasses us into empathy? Because sometimes the loudest statement isn't made in anger. It's made in grace and in the unshakable strength of simply belonging.